Good morning. I know you guys are all pumped up and really looking forward to the debate now, right? Yes? Thank you. Come on, where is the energy? Thank you. All the debating team members are here? Perfect. So we begin day 2 of the Global Finance Conclave, session 6, and it is primarily targeted at and participated with the students. Should India emulate the Chinese model of economic growth and development is the first session, and then the next session after a quick break we'll be talking about international trade and tax policies, and the afternoon session after lunch is primarily focused on women and how they can influence and change the economic growth cycle for India. Session 9 is about taking advantage of the economic downturns going on right now and using some innovations and disruptive technologies to take India forward. And then the final valedictory session is scheduled for later in the evening as well. Okay. So we have again a fairly somewhat relaxed compared to yesterday, but still power-packed program for today. Okay. So please settle down. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Vinit Bhatia, sorry. I don't know who is Vinit Kumar.
Good morning, students. So, this session is about should India evaluate the Chinese model of economic growth and development. So, we are looking forward to hear your thoughts and views. And what interesting about Chinese economy is that it's been doing pretty well over the last several decades. And during this time, its GDP has quadrupled, and now it is second largest economy in the world. So now the question comes whether India, which is looking for this $5 trillion economy in next several years ahead, should India follow the Chinese model or not? So this is one of the questions we would try to ponder on, and where students will participate to find the answers whether India should copy the Chinese model or not. So this debate will focus on 5 main areas of similarities and distinctions between India and China. It would be about international trade and foreign policy, infrastructure and manufacturing, sustainability and environment, institutions and rule of law, and last one, fifth, it is technology and higher education. So which model is better, and should India adopt a similar approach to China? So our teams will be divided into 5 speakers from each team, and 5 will be researchers. So, and this session will be, we can say, headed or judged, or we can say, see which team is doing good, or on what points they are doing good, will be judged by Professor Ying Hong Yang, who is Associate Professor at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal University. So he's PhD from Sun Yat-sen University, China, and his work primarily focuses in the area of India-China relationship and how it is developing and the international relationship between these. And he's been a visiting scholar at very premier institutes around the world, which is Harvard, Yen Cheng Institute, Asia Research Institute, the National University of Singapore, etc. And his primary interests also include Gandhian Satyagraha comparative political studies of India and China. And his recent publication, and you should also read about this, and I will encourage you to read about it. It is a case study of Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha fasting, and that is published in Chinese. So you should look forward to read it. And our next panelist is Mr. Yogesh Mittal, who is graduate from Pune University Symbiosis College, and he is chartered accountant by profession. And he has more than a decade of experience in PwC and KPMG consulting big powerhouses in world. And he majors in taxation profile and is currently the CFO and lead strategy for JBM Environment Business Division. And he contributes actively to the Taxman magazine publications. And our next panelist is Mr. Anirban Mukherjee. And please, big round of applause for him. Mr. Mukherjee is senior manager within Qualcomm Government Affairs Department. So you know that this company works in the domain of IT, and more recently it is focusing on wireless. And it is based in New Delhi, and he manages Qualcomm's wireless research initiative in India and Southeast Asia. So Mr. Mukherjee has over 25 years of over 25 years of experience in which is diversified over business, governmental, and information technology sector. And prior to joining Qualcomm, in 2012, he's implemented the E-District and Common Service Center program for the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So our panelists have very vast work ethics and vast knowledge over how the Indian economy or the Chinese economy works. So we are looking forward to hear from you. Mr. Mukherjee has received his postgraduate diploma in rural management from IRMA, which is one of the leading institutes in rural studies and for management in India over several decades. And he is also BSc in mathematics from St. Stephen College, University of Delhi. And our our mentors for this debate for what we say student groups is first Dr. Soumyadeep Roy, who is assistant professor at JSPF. And he is PhD from Iowa State University. And prior to that, he has worked in USA with multinational corporations. And now we are very pleased that he has joined us. And our next mentor is Dr. Amlan Das Gupta. He is PhD from British Columbia University. And he has also taught in various capacity at various international level institutes. They will later on introduce to you to the student members of the groups or the participants in the groups. So I'll invite Dr. Yan Hong Yuan for the opening remarks, please. Please give him a round of applause.
Namaste, good morning. I'm happy to be here. Actually, this is a big surprise for me. When I was talking with Ram at the time when I was attending a conference in Sandinikota, also about India and China, about their governance experience, and in the Sandinikota for a conference there, I didn't aware that I will deliver an opening remark here. So for that, I didn't wear a formal address for me. I should wear the jacket, the Indian jacket. Normally I wear that jacket when I attend Indian affairs here. But I think for this, so I don't prepare much for this opening remarks. And another issue is that if I talk too much, and then there will be too overlapping with the debate about the content. But here I would like to say something like that. Firstly, I'm here. It is something like India and China's elements here. Another one, yeah, of course, because I'm Indian scholar. I teach Mahatma Gandhi. I'm doing research on Mahatma Gandhi, and recently I have 2 publications on the land acquisition issue in India and China. Yeah, one is an China report, another is the Oxford University Press, one book test there about the experience of land acquisition in India and China. So there's quite some kind of development issue that in India and China can be recent. And even this slogan, building a 5 billion trillion Indian economy, the way forward. I mean, this slogan, I think this slogan was raised by Modi. But things is really similar for me as a Chinese. We find there are so many slogans by the Communism Party in China. They say we are going to eradicate poverty in 2020. So this is the big task by Xi Jinping to accomplish in the coming years. And we say that we are going to accomplish like 200th anniversary regarding like the 2014, China should be middle like once like in China we call like development country. Like we should become a developed country at that time, 2014. And why this 2021? Because that's the 100 years of the establishment of the Communist Party in China. So we are doing same things. When I find like Modi said, "Made in India," Modi come up with the slogan like "Made in India," like 5 trillion Indian economy. This is similar things from India and China. They try to come up with a slogan, and this slogan try to anchor, inspire their citizens, their peoples to accomplish a goal for these two countries. In terms of India and China, if we say that, I think firstly we must aware that we are very unique in the whole world, because India and China is the number 1 and number 2 population in the world. So naturally, India and China is not a nation; it's beyond a nation. The total amount is 1/3 of the whole world in terms of the population. Population is more than like population itself. At the same time, means human activities. That means we amount to 1/3 of human activities in the whole world. So it is not 2 nations and 150 or 180 nations. It's much beyond that. So we must be aware that we are a huge society, and that we are also developing society in the same time. And we are also like rapid developing country, because this is also really unique. If we compare India and Pakistan, Palestine and Sri Lanka, we can find that Bangladesh, we can find that India grow much faster than other South Asian countries. But China also as well, in the East Asian, China is still a miracles there. So this is the similarities there we can find there. So these two countries, they are huge society, and they themselves global. So imagine that when someday China and India become a developed country, then the whole world is almost in the developed world, because they contribute 1/3 of the world's population. And then past Europe and America and like other countries, other developed countries, we can find that the whole world will be changed, will be transformed if China and India become developed country. So we are globally, in terms, anything happen in India and China, it is global. So this is very important when we compare India and China. But at the same time, we find that they are so different. So like the starting point is so different. I've been to like Jindal University, and I have quite some discussion with the scholars there in the economy department. And I find that in India, you never have experience of shortage. But people like me and my father, we have, in their generation, we have a very, very strong sense of the shortage. Even in the 1991, 1992, and the early 1990s, China had the economy of a shortage. So this economy of shortage, I think India never experienced. From my discussion with them. Another thing is that China have a very like strong experience of the revolution. There are so many revolutions in China, and India never happened. This non-violent movements there. So not to mention that there are so many structural differences there, like the political system, the economic system, so many of them. Okay, so this is very important. I mean, we are trying so many experience in terms of development approaches. But this approach is still going on. We are not where we are heading. And we are trying to do our best to accomplish some goals in these two countries. But finally, after 20 years, we can find that. Maybe after 20 years, finally, we can find that these two countries, they have accomplished so much in terms of the like modernity of the whole world. So this is the similar comparison. But another thing I would like to hear, you are not going to discuss, cover it, is about the connections between India and China. They are not supported with each other. I can find so many traders in India and China, and like if you go to China, you can find yoga, Buddhism, so influential there. So yeah, so I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I find that the discussion is quite comprehensive, and here I find that there is something like that, and they are going to discuss about international trade and foreign policy, infrastructure, manufacturing, sustainability and environment, institutions, rule of law, technology, and higher education. This is really comprehensive. We want to understand India and China. So I'm looking forward to the debate. And also, I mean, for students, I hope that someday, even after the discussion, I think this is some kind of seed in your mind. I hope someday, even when you graduate, or you may carry on some like interactions between India and China, or you going on your own world in India, or internationally. I hope that this discussion will like plant a seed in your mind. And sometimes you could understand that what you have experienced, what you are debating is more than the issue is shown. Because India and China, as a huge society, themselves is contributing to the experience of human on how to develop, how to promote the wealth of their people in the 21st century and the first half of the 21st century. Thank you. That's my remarks. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Huang, for your wonderful opening remark about India-China relationship, similarity and difference between these two countries. And now I would like to invite the mentors of the teams, and we'll start the debate. And first I would like to call Professor Gupta on the stage to introduce his team and call them on the stage.
Thank you, Anit. So it's a great pleasure to introduce the team for the 2018 batch. This is Team Platinum. So the first speaker is going to be Aaron Anish Cherian. Can you please? And second speaker, Amya Gupta. Third speaker is Ria Vij. Fourth is Pratik Prataya. And the last speaker will be Sarthak Aneja. So thank you. It was great working with you. So best of luck to both teams. And I think now I'll give the stage over to Somadeep, right?
Good morning, everybody. I am the mentor for the 2019 batch. We have 5 speakers and 5 researchers. I'll first introduce the researchers and then I'll call the speakers on stage. The researchers are Nimisha Nanda, Sarveshwaran Arangathan, Devna Khandelwal, M. Priyadarshi Mishra, and Karan Dhawan. My team will be going for the motion, so we are going to argue why India should emulate the Chinese model of economic growth and development. And now I'm going to call the speakers one by one, if you could come on stage. Sachi Rajpal, Aman Madan, Nikhilesh Dawar, Prabhav Tomar, and last speaker is Vidit Khanduri. I look forward to this debate. Thank you very much.
So sorry, I should have also introduced the researchers. So the researchers for the 2018 team, and they should also come up here because there are seats for you here as well. So Prisha Sood, Likita Erdala, Vedanta Ray, Arnav Jain, and Mihirjeet Singh.
So we'll start with for the motion, and you will have 5 minutes each, and there will be clock in front of you so that you do not overshoot the time. So all the best, guys.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sachi Rajpal, Prime Minister side proposition on the motion, should India emulate Chinese model of economic growth and development? To begin with, I would like to define the key terms of the topic. First, should, used to indicate obligation, duty, or correctness, typically when criticizing someone's actions. Second, emulate, match or surpass a person or achievement, typically by imitation. Third, economic growth, an increase in the amount of goods and services produced per head of the population over a period of time. And fourth, economic development. It's the growth of the standard of living of a nation's people from a low-income economy to a high-income economy. For the side of the proposition to prove their stand, they need to prove to the House and to us how the government is free from red tapeism and how privatization does not lead to capitalism. To begin with my constructives, I would like to present my first constructive, which deals with poverty and inequality. China, being a developing economy, has succeeded in uplifting over 700 million people out of poverty, accounting for nearly 80% of the poverty eradication in the world. This fact has alone changed China and the world forever. China has tried to combine the strength of the invisible hand of the market force and the visible hand of the state. China has adopted a mixed economic setup after the economic reform of 1979. Its economy is primarily known as a socialist market economy. The late leader, Deng Xiaoping, concluded that neither the Western model nor the Soviet model really worked for a vast developing country desiring for modernization. China is the fastest growing country in the world. China is the fastest growing country in East Asia since the economic reform. Owing to China's strategic policy making, the aggregate exports in China rose 6.1% in 1999 to $195 billion and 10.8% in 2017 to $422.5 billion. The increase is mostly attributable to the revival in exports to South Korea, Thailand, and Japan, and continued strong growth in exports to US and Europe. China has successfully, over the past 2 decades, maintained an impressive rate of economic development as well as economic growth while maintaining a soaring average GDP of 9.88%. In order to support my above constructives, I would like to present some facts and figures. First, aggregate imports in China rose to $1.8 trillion, mostly due to the replacement of the previously smuggled imports by regular imports, but also partly reflecting more robust economic growth. Second, adjusted for the deflation factor of approximately 4% in export and import prices, aggregate exports have actually been growing very strongly in real terms. Third, the net trade surplus is $351.76 billion compared to an estimated muggling adjusted trade surplus of $20 to $25 billion US dollars in 1998. Moving on to my second constructive. In China, only 3 agricultural commodities, grains, cotton, and tobacco, remain under the central plan. The price of low-grade grain is controlled, the price of energy is stable at world market levels, and the prices of oil and gasoline are freely determined in the market. China increased farm productivity through structural adjustment to enlarge the scale of operations and promote transfer of collectively owned land. The government grants loans to upgrade fields, provide irrigation and complementary infrastructure, provide services to farmers in the form of advice, training, marketing, science, and technology. Moving on to my third constructive, trade and finance. The Chinese financial market has shown great stability alongside controlled progression. China has been taken off the non-market economies list of European Union. The nation has also maintained a unified exchange rate since January 1994 and a current account convertibility since December 1996. The exporters are permitted to retain 15% of the foreign exchange proceeds as of October 1997. And private enterprises account for approximately 11% of the GDP in 1998 and approximately 60% in 2018. Our main argument is that Chinese authorities have applied a gradual anti-crisis approach to reform since 1978. This approach means that the Chinese government has both pursued a modest modest reform measures and reacted quickly to internal and external shocks. Structurally speaking, the party and the Chinese central government control over social resources represents an implicit guarantee against potential collapses. In the gradual anti-crisis approach to reform is the key policy framework through which China has been able to avoid these three collapses. This policy framework has three properties that combined serve as a firewall against major crises: gradualism, swift, anti-crisis targeting, and a high degree of autonomy in policy adjustments. I would like to conclude by saying that amongst the two nations facing similar challenges, one has clearly shown greater progress than the other. Therefore, emulating the Chinese economic model shall only carry India towards better days. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Today we'll be standing against the motion that China shouldn't emulate the growth pattern, that India shouldn't emulate the growth pattern that China has followed. No doubt China's economic growth in the past 4 decades has been quite spectacular. They have transformed an agrarian economy into an international powerhouse, and today the second largest economy in the world. However, they face a number of problems, and these are slightly, relatively less well known. From their current economic slowdown, their crashing financial system, and aging population, and so on. China even today faces heavy criticisms on how they achieved these reforms, be it the Great Leap Forward by Mao Zedong, or the Tiananmen Square incident, where the Chinese army opened fire on citizens who were protesting for change and reforms for a more democratic approach. India, on the other hand, initially aiming at self-sufficiency, then opened its doors for foreign competition and is at a considerable economic standpoint as of today. In comparison, India and China are two completely different economies. The only thing that's common between them is, of course, the large population. I ask you today, ladies and gentlemen, in a country like India, the birthplace of 4 major religions of the world, 22 major languages, each having thousands of dialects, a country with more cultural diversity than most countries of the world combined, how can we adopt a model suited for people of one race, religion, and culture? And how can we let one party have complete autocratic control to do what's best for the nation without considering the woes of her people? And how can we force our people to completely forsake years of tradition and culture in the name of development? There is absolutely no way that we can adopt this Chinese growth model. I shall represent 2 strong arguments for the same. Firstly, I want to talk about politics. That is the political system of India and China. While Chinese central government follows a very concentrated hierarchical structure, which sounds very lucrative because of the fact that decisions can be made faster and bills can be passed quicker, it has very obvious downfalls. It is not the most viable option for developing and not so financially rich nations such as India, for the reason being that India is a very diverse country with wide representations in various aspects which have given birth to its multi-party system. This multi-party system is the backbone of the democracy we flaunt. The central government of China has used its unparalleled power to pass on bills that have affected a major chunk of the population and made them suffer, and in the end caused suicides as well. Under Mao Zedong's rule, the Chinese government forcefully acquired lands, stripped landlords of their properties, and then redistributed it among 75 million peasants. Even though this may sound like an initiative to provide equal rights and access to people, it definitely is not. To start off, the peasants had to pay high taxes to the state in the form of grains, the supply yield, and which could be sold to the private market, and was not enough to support a family to maintain a decent lifestyle. Laws in India are quite strict about land acquisition by the government, suggesting that fair compensation should be paid and other characteristics should be met. However, people in India have a strong connection with their land, be it religious or just a fond attachment, and people would rather lay their lives down than lose their lands. For example, we could see in the Chipko movement that people hugged onto trees and focused and sort of were ready to lay their lives down rather than have capitalists take over the land. Secondly, I want to emphasize on the economic and financial conditions of both countries. So basically, China's economic condition is in a really bad shape right now. Their four main state-led banks have NPAs ranging to almost 670 billion and have failed to recover despite 3 large-scale recapitalization processes. Just to bring into proportion, India's largest bank, SBI, holds assets amounting to just 1/15 of one of these big 4 banks. And hence, we can't afford such sort of expansion or growth that China has followed. Our own banking sector is facing a large number of NPAs, and private banks are facing frauds. And our fiscal deficit is so high, and we've been trying to reduce it for so long, and it has not been working. And hence, financially, we're not in a position to undertake this, and simply saying we don't have the money for this. As my time is running out, I'd like to say that there are many lessons to be learned from China, and these lessons should act as mere lessons and not an instruction book. We should take certain pointers from the Chinese economy, but we should achieve our penultimate goal of the $5 trillion economy in our own way. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Aman Madan, the Deputy Prime Minister for the motion, India should emulate the Chinese model of economic growth and development. In order to better understand why India should take such a big step and why adopting China's model of economic growth and development is the right decision, we need to analyze the similarities between the two nations, India's present state, as well as key features of the Chinese economic model. Now let's talk about the similarities. Both nations have almost the same amount of arable land. China has 143 million hectares, while India has 162 million hectares. A relative abundance of natural resources, namely iron and coal. They also have a potentially huge domestic market, given the sizes of their population. Now, China and India both have availability of abundant and cheap labor. And both countries rely heavily on coal and renewable energy for power generation. Now let's talk about the reality of the Indian economy and why we need to bring about a change. In the first quarter of financial year 2020, India's GDP growth was reported to be only 5%, which is the lowest in 6 years, while the nominal GDP growth was only 8%, which is the lowest in 17 years. And several economists claim that this data has been heavily manipulated by the government. Even the industrial and cultural sector are declining. In the first quarter of financial year 2020, the manufacturing sector only grew by a mere 0.6%, while in the first quarter of 2019, the manufacturing sector grew by 12.1%. Similarly, the agricultural sector in the first quarter of 2020 grew only 2%, while in 2019, it grew by 5.1%. Ladies and gentlemen, India is in an economic crisis. According to data released by NSSO, the National Sample Survey Office, India is facing its worst unemployment condition in 45 years. In the urban areas, urban youth in the ages of 15 to 29 are facing unemployment rates of 18.7%, and the situation is significantly worse for our female population, as they're facing unemployment rates of 27.2%. Let's talk about corporate investment and FDIs. In the year demonetization was announced, 2016, corporate investment fell over 60%. And when the government budget was announced in 2019, it led to a withdrawal of rupees 475 crore of FDI in the first week of its announcement. Even our rural sector is declining. In the financial year 2014, the rural wage growth was estimated to be 14.6%, while in the financial year 2019, it is only 1.1%. Keeping these facts in mind, now, more than ever, there is a need for change if India wants to become a superpower and a developed nation in the future. Let's analyze some key features of the Chinese model of economic growth and development. Number one, constant trial and error experimentation. Number 2, gradual reform rather than neoliberal economic shock therapy. Number 3, selective cultural borrowing of foreign ideas. And most importantly, number 4, a pattern of implementing easy reforms first and difficult ones later. These key features are ideal for India to adopt given the resemblance shared by these nations. As said by my Prime Minister, Sachi Rajpal, China is the second largest economy in the world, growing at an average rate of 9.88%. Despite having exceptional amounts of success internally, the government strives to explore renewable ways of development. The Chinese government has started to disinvest not only in the extraction but also the consumption of coal and has started to venture into renewable energy. China is leading in the production of hydropower, wind power, and the undisputed producer of solar power. By 2020, it is estimated that China will produce enough energy from renewable sources that it will exceed the total energy produced by Germany. India, given its current state, needs to adopt a sustainable model of development that the Chinese government is striving to achieve. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Peter Ferdinand Drucker has rightly said that the ultimate resource in economic development is people. It is people, not capital or raw materials, that develop an economy. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking about why India should not follow China's growth model. My fellow teammate has already proposed his ideas on the political system and finance sector. I'm going to be talking about two main arguments to further strengthen the arguments Aaron made. My first argument, the manufacturing sector. China is well known as the manufacturing hub of the world. To be able to develop the manufacturing sector of country to an extent where it becomes the strength of the economy, China made manufacturing sector its primary focus, neglecting other industries and people, which eventually led to it having to rebalance the economy to make the growth sustainable. India, on the other hand, should adopt a more dynamic approach. Instead of focusing on the manufacturing sector to emulate China, it should put more focus on the service sector. The service sector in India is much more developed than the manufacturing sector. It is the backbone of the Indian economy. According to Invest in India, service sector constitutes 53% of the GDP as opposed to 31% contributed by the manufacturing sector. Even though India should focus more on the service sector as compared to other industries, it should not neglect other industries and people as China did to boost the manufacturing sector. China, to be able to reach at that level, started producing cheap and bad quality products. Due to goods being cheaper than the goods of the other countries, the manufacturing and trade sector started flourishing. But what they sacrificed to make this happen was not cheap. They decreased the wages of their personnel in order to decrease the production cost, which led to an increase in suicide and decreased standard of living of the workforce, of the economy. Do you think it is ethical to sacrifice the lives of others just to generate income for the economy? What will they do with all that income when people of the country are themselves suffering? According to a 2011 Center for Disease Control and Prevention report, the country has a high suicide rate with almost 22 deaths per 1 lakh persons. One such example of this is Foxconn, where 14 people committed suicide in 2010 alone due to low wages and high pressure at work. Due to the flourishing of the manufacturing sector, currently the cost of labor has increased. Cheap labor is not cheap anymore, due to which firms and industries have shifted their manufacturing activities outside of China. If India boosts the service sector, instead of the manufacturing sector, even if the cost of labor increases, the scope of them getting paid satisfied wages will be higher due to the nature of the industry. China has sacrificed its reputation in order to boost its manufacturing sector, but by providing extremely cheap products, due to which now many countries have imposed tariffs and dumping duty on Chinese goods. The imports and exports due to these have sharply dropped. Another reason of importing tariffs and its reputation getting destroyed is the alleged theft of technology and intellectual property that China takes part in. China, in order to develop high-tech products and manufacturing in their country, invests in companies of other countries in order to steal the technological know-how and implement the same in their country. China has very strict restrictions in foreign investment. It does not allow other firms to conduct a business unless it forms a joint venture with Chinese companies. Though through this, they proceed to steal their technology. Do you think India, being a country of innovation, would want to steal ideas and have no originality at all to have pride in? Now, my second argument will be the environment policies. All of China's development and growth has come at the cost of the environment. Do you really think it is wise to first completely destroy the environment and then try restoring it after there is very low after which there is very low probability of doing so? While China has made progress cutting smog, the damage to the health of millions of people has already been done. China faces about 1.6 million premature deaths as a result of air pollution, the Health Effects Institute said in a report. Even though China has managed to control the pollution level, it was able to do so because it had that kind of finance and resources that could be spent on such high budget projects. But India, on the other hand, is a developing country and does not have that kind of budget to do what China did. Environment Kuznets curves tells us that China is improving its environment, but it surely cannot replenish biodiversity and health of the people affected. So if India neglects the environment like China did, it will not be able to restore it and will lose it forever. I strongly believe that China's growth model is not the model which India is looking for. Thank you.
I invite next speaker from Party. I'll request the members to be ready for your turn, so that we do not lose much time in between.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nikhilesh Davar, representing the proposing council as the chief whip on the topic, should India emulate Chinese economic model of growth and development? Now, ladies and gentlemen, the stand that side opposition has presented us today, I must say, and to define their stand, I would say, that they have just provided us a set of astonishing speeches with cherry-picked facts and figures, self-serving motives, and their speeches were full of misrepresentations, misinterpretations, and misquotations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the first speaker came up and talked about, well, when the first speaker came up and said the topic, he just spoke about the growth pattern and forgot to mention the economic development. Now, our side has clearly stated all the definitions of the topic, and yes, yet we weren't provided any definition challenge by the opposition. So, which means that our definitions were correct. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the side there comes up and talks about the great leap forward of 1958 to 1962. Let me tell you one thing. Today we aren't discussing the great leap forward. We are discussing the economic reform of 1979. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, it again put me on the sad part that, they talk about people that are responsible for economic growth. Let me tell you one of the features of Chinese economic development, which is that the Chinese economic model of growth and development is people's livelihood oriented. Conduct political, social, economic reforms, that's what they believe in. They must all be down to earth and produce tangible benefits to the Chinese people in material, culture, and other terms. They have succeeded in lifting over 700 million out of poverty, accounting for nearly 80% poverty eradication in the world. This fact has alone changed China and the world forever. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I need to ask you one basic thing. They talk about China empowering their own companies over there, which means that China believes in made in China, which is one of their most important factors that they want to achieve by 2025. And that's what now India is doing, that is made in India. When we talk about should India emulate Chinese economic model growth of development, I would say India has already started emulating Chinese model of growth and development. And that's what we can see today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the side there comes up and tells us that service sector in India is better than the manufacturing sector. Well, then I ask you one question. What about the unemployment rate? If service sector is better than the manufacturing sector in India, people are employed in China, and that's what people aren't in India. The unemployment rate in India is at a great level, and that's what, if we emulate China's economic model of growth and development, people will be employed. They will have at least money to eat, to have 3 meals in a day. And that's what we are focusing on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I again ask you a very simple and an important question. We asked them, we provided them a burden that they had to prove, which was that how there is no red tapeism in the Indian government and how privatization does not lead to capitalism, which they failed to prove again. So, ladies and gentlemen, side opposition is sitting there and not listening to our points, which we are asking them to prove, which again brings them down at this debate. Now, again, ladies and gentlemen, there is one more thing that needs to be brought to this house. They talked about we can't, we can't, we can't. Today, when we are at this conference and talking about India building a 5 trillion Indian economy, that's the way forward. We want a $5 trillion Indian economy. Now, if we go on saying that we can't, we can't, we can't, then yes, I guess $5 trillion economy, I would say we can't achieve that, because that's what they are supporting. Now, I would tell you one thing. At present, our GDP rate is 5%. We need 9% to achieve the $5 trillion economy. Now, if I'll say we can't achieve that 9% GDP rate to achieve $5 trillion economy, then yes, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot. Let's be optimistic about this point and let's believe that yes, we can. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, I just say one thing. Let's work for a better India before a new India. Thank you.
I invite next speaker from Team Platinum.
Can money buy life? My opponent glorified the shift from the agrarian economy to the manufacturing sector and the spectacular growth. But what she and he did not mention is how. They did so by killing huge number of people. Under Mao's rule, they snatched their agricultural land forcefully and forced them in the manufacturing sector. Now, they're going to argue that it's justified if you see the development that China has gone through and how people who were once poor and are now enjoying a good standard of life. But is this the kind of development that India wants to aim for, where you have to kill off people and force them to live their life how the government wants to and not how they want to? Now, they're going to say that the model is not wrong, but the way it was implemented is. In India, to acquire land, the government has to provide a fair compensation and to the people. But people in India highly relate religion to their land. As Aaron mentioned, no price that you can pay is enough to be able to convince them to give it up. Now tell me, how are you going to implement this? I would like to ask all of you, what would you choose? 3 meals a day or just simply not dying? Now let me bring to your attention what China is known for and how they've achieved this development in the manufacturing sector. China is known for its strategy of stealing intellectual property, and a national security concern arises due to this. China, in order to develop high-tech products and develop manufacturing in their country, invests in companies of other countries in order to steal their technological know-how and implement the same in their own country. This is China's idea of innovation. Is this the kind of innovation my fellow opponent is talking about? Due to this kind of reputation, tariffs and dumping duty have been imposed on Chinese products, which has led to their exports and imports slowing down. Now let's talk about their financial sector. My fellow opponent talked about their spectacular growth, but not about their failing financial sector. I would like to strictly oppose and question their claim of the financial sector being stable. The situation is so bad, all the households and private sector have started taking part in shadow financing. As Aaron pointed out, China's debt is equal to 50% of the GDP. China's banks are failing with NPAs amounting to 670 billion. Was it worth it to sacrifice the country's financial sector just to boost the manufacturing sector? As stated by Chief Statistician yesterday, NPA problem occurs not as a sign of failure, but because the country is trying to create new ways to earn money. India, with its huge fiscal deficit, does not have the kind of money or resources to pull this off. If we follow China's economic model, our financial system will also crash, leading to numerous economic and financial crises. You keep talking about if we should emulate China's economic model, but the real question is, can India do it? Let's talk about the manufacturing sector. Most of the points have been mentioned by my teammates, but I would just like to leave you with the thought. Was it worth it? You talk about the poverty level, but you don't mention the increased inequality prevalent in China. There are researches showing that the inequality has drastically increased. Rich have become richer and poor have become poorer. And if we talk about the poverty being eradicated, the poverty line has been dropped to $360, where the international constant is 720. It's the fastest growing economy, but the growth has been continuously decreasing. They have mentioned that the exports have been increasing, but I would like to point out that the exports have been increasing not just because of the growth, but also because of the currency devaluation. China devalued its own currency to increase their exports, which has contributed immensely to their financial crisis. I would also like to point out that my fellow opponents threw a lot of facts at us, but there were no reference of those facts. You said we threw misrepresentations and misinterpretations, but where are your references and evidence? They have thrown big numbers, but failed to relate it to anything specific. Yes, you stated all the definitions available on Google, but what our side did was show you the real picture. In the end, I would just like to say that even though I want India to have the same growth as China, but not at the cost China did. Thank you.
Next speaker, please, from Team Rodeo.
A very good morning to everyone present here today. My name is Prabhav Tomar, and I'm the second Chief Whip for the proposing council. The opposing council have made a few good points, but however, they did not give us a fair view. The facts are 1, limited, 2, some lack a lot of logical sense, and 3, maybe a few even are factually inaccurate. I'll show how. Which is why I'm here today to retaliate and give you a fair sense as to why India should emulate China's economic policies. Our first two speakers have already clearly stated by giving us 6 arguments to why we should not emulate China's model for economic growth and development. Which is why, without any further ado, I would like to move forward with my retaliation. I'm going to start off with the manufacturing sector as they focused on it so much. For the manufacturing countries like India and China, and I do call India a manufacturing country because that is the only way, as Nikhilesh said, we are going to move ahead to become a $5 trillion economy. So for the manufacturing countries, India, oil is an utmost necessity. And China understands that very well. They've shown this by making sure that the prices of oil and gasoline is determined by the market forces of simple demand and supply. Policies like these are very, very vital if an economy aims at achieving economic growth. The first speaker, Aaron, also spoke about how China acquired land to redistribute. But let me tell you this, that never happened. That is just clear factual inaccuracy. What China actually did was create something called SOE, state-owned enterprises, which saved them from the global financial crisis, not entirely, but to a certain extent. But eventually, these SOEs created something called the LGFVs, Local Government Financial Vehicles. Now, what the main role of these local government financial vehicles are to provide to fund local infra projects and social welfare facilities. They did so to enhance the economic development and economic growth. Also, I would like to ask the second speaker if they can actually prove the point they made about the financial sector crash. How it is so slow, how it is moving down, and if you can actually show me how any of their indexes are under ours. With this, I would like to conclude by saying thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm actually really surprised that the opposition actually survived taking the further motion part of this. And that's fairly because it's not really viable for India to pick that up. I would like to start by saying, do you realize that you have a centralized government system that only functions on two parties? And even under that, the ruling party has the entire control over the banking sector. They can manipulate the rules and regulations for that. Compared to it, India has a multi-party system where even if you want to pass a bill, you need to have majority of the votes in the Lok Sabha. All right? Now, secondly, let me touch on the banking system in India. It is controlled by RBI and SEBI, which are independent functioning bodies. All right? Now, let's move on to this amazing point where the first refuter was really mentioning that we can. I'm asking, can we? Do you really think that we can, target the $12.5 trillion economy with our current 2-point-something trillion economy? You think we can reach there? You're comparing their developed situation to our underdeveloping or worse, in some cases, really underdeveloped situations. How? Can you propose formulas for it? Maybe explain it on the board so that we can learn it properly. Now let's, as my colleague actually pointed out, that China actually decreased the poverty line to $360 a year, and anyone earning above it was not considered to be a BPL, while the international constant for it is $720. That's manipulating of policies. That's not how a country works. That's not ethical, and India is a country known for ethics. We don't go to war. That's known as ethics. Also, let me also give an example of the data stealing and manipulation. Are you aware of the company Huawei? I'm pretty sure everyone is. Do you know what happened to them right now? Android took their license to use Android as their operating system in their mobile phones. Do you know why? Because their Kirin chipsets stole technology from Snapdragon, which is an American company. Now also let me just focus quickly on the agriculture sector of our country, which surprisingly you did not mention because it is actually the most dominant sector in India and it actually earns really well, unlike the popular opinion. If some of you may have been a science student in your higher school, you might have gotten a suggestion from your biology teacher that you should actually approach for a job in the agriculture sector and become a researcher there. Why? Because government pays you a hefty amount to actually research and provide input. These researches are being done constantly. Now let's move on to the China coming out of the poverty line, right? So they somehow uplifted 700 million people out of poverty. Now, in the last 10 years, the poverty in India has reduced from 58% to 17% in India. Now, India has a target to reach below 10% in the poverty line by 2025. That is just 6 years away. And comparing the ratio, I think it's very much possible. Now also let me emphasize on the service sector that India has. Service sector has more capacity to actually help people who want to come out of the poverty line, coupled by the agriculture sector. Manufacturing sector requires a lot of physical effort and training. Indian population is simply not ready for that. The main reason for that is that we live in different parts of the country with different cultures and religions and lifestyle. Someone is really good at heavy lifting stuff. Some are mentally more active. What I can say is the Northeast people are actually smarter compared to the rest of the world. or maybe the rest of the country. Also, now I'm going to come back to the first point that I mentioned, that India has a diverse, multi-party system. Now, because of this, in 1861, under the British rule, the LGBTQ community was considered to be a criminal act, which was uplifted in 2018. Not saying that it took almost 200 years for India to actually uplift it, but 10 years. 5 years. It started in 2014 and it took almost 4.5 years to do it, while China did the same in 1971. So now basically what my bottom line is, India is a very different country compared to China. We are a country of religion, diversity, and ethics. We can't simply steal things and change ourselves. Thank you.
So these should be closing remarks from your side, because he's the last speaker.
Good morning. There are three types of lies. Lies, absolute lies, and then the arguments that were said by the opposition. Wow, what an exhilarating and intense discussion it has been till now. Friends, ladies, and gentlemen, before I summarize and conclude, I would quickly like to recall, highlight, and expand the important issues that have been raised by my fellow speakers. 50 years ago, both India and China were amongst the poorest and economically isolated countries of the world. However, ever since Deng Xiaoping started the great reforms in 1978, the Chinese economic growth has been phenomenal. China is the second largest economy with worth 14 trillion US dollars with an average growth rate of 9% in the past 2 decades. On the other hand, the economic reforms in India started in 1991. India is emerging as an economic power, becoming the 5th largest economy worth 2.8 trillion US dollars and an average growth rate of 6%. China has achieved to double its GDP every 8 years and raised an estimated 700 million people out of poverty. China has become the world's largest economy on a PPP basis, largest manufacturer, trader, and holder of foreign exchange. This growth has been achieved by China by focusing on the following sectors as mentioned by my fellow speakers, that are namely manufacturing, infrastructure, foreign trade, finance, technology, defense production, and FDI. India, on the other hand, started almost 2 decades later, but is slowly trying to catch up. So, the question which often crops up is that if China and India were in similar state through the 50s and the 60s, and today China is a great economic success story, then shouldn't India too follow China's growth model? As the previous speaker mentioned, India is an underdeveloped economy. Well, that is not true. India is a developing economy. I stand here to express our stance that yes, India should follow China's growth model. This year's economic survey clearly states what has all along been the view of this government. India should emulate the East Asian growth model, in particular the Chinese one. The overwhelming evidence across the globe, especially from China and East Asia in recent times, is that high growth rates have only been sustained by a growth model driven by a virtuous cycle of savings, investment, exports, supported by a favorable demographic phase. The key driver of growth has to be investment. It drives demand, creates capacity, increases labor productivity, introduces new technology, and generates jobs. India must continue improving the climate for rapid economic growth on the strength of the only 2 sustainable engines: private investment, and exports. And the Chinese model of export-led growth has been guiding light for all developing economies. The problem, of course, is how to get from an economy powered by consumption to an investment-driven one. How do we create a conducive environment for investment? Well, we need to lower the cost of capital. A cross-country comparison shows that the cost of capital remains quite high in India, which affects investment prospects in the country. India needs to focus on research and development and innovations, and should also encourage mass-scale manufacturing. We need to encourage startup and ensure that they grow into larger enterprise. For this, it is important that the government removes restrictive labor laws. Like China, we must follow on top-class infrastructure development. This will provide numerous jobs, increase consumption, and fuel growth. China has developed its defense industry commendably. This not only saves its precious foreign exchange by not importing arms and equipment, but also has opened an avenue for exports. India must emulate China in this regard to propel its growth. Therefore, I would like to recommend and propagate that if Chinese growth model has led to so much economic growth in China and has benefited in all spheres, then we should emulate the Chinese growth model. Thank you.
What got them here won't get us there. A country that was based in agriculture and then made a remarkable shift to the industrial sector with a GDP of around $12.5 trillion, China has successfully paved its way to become a superpower. But is China's skyrocketing pace of development actually good for us? It all started in the earlier times when the agricultural sector was taken away from the Chinese, and they were forcefully asked to move to the other sectors. In China, religion played a great role in agriculture. Do you actually think it was ethical to take lands from the people and force them to another sector? When we come and talk about the Chinese banking sector, the formal sector banks do not serve private sectors and people in the household sector as well. They focus basically on the government projects and finance them without considering the risk involved in the projects. And due to that, we can see that as per the World Economic Forum, there's around 670 billion US dollars of Chinese NPA. And when we talk about that of India, and when we say that should we emulate this, I really don't think so. Every day when we get up and we get to your news, Jet is going down, Air India is going down, I really don't think we should initiate such projects. India's actually got a lot of infrastructural debt. So also I would like to mention that when the opposition mentioned their facts, they did not cite their sources. So I can't feel that their facts are like really authentic. When we talk about India's fiscal deficit, so if we try to emulate the Chinese model, we would go on even further and get a lot of more fiscal deficit. Stock markets in China are incapable of creating long-term wealth for the investors. Whereas when we look at the Indian stock markets and the Indian financial system, it seems to be much more mature than the Chinese one. Indian stock market has a lot of great opportunities for foreign institutional investors as well. And the Chinese market is quite volatile. Now let me get to the manufacturing sector. China has done a great job in its manufacturing sector with its cheap products. It's tried to export all over the world. But should India not emulate them and go to the service sector instead? When we've got models like Uber, Swiggy, and Ola, and when we've seen these models helping India to boost the economy, so why should we go around following the manufacturing sector, polluting our environment? One of my fellow friends mentioned about Foxconn case. So when Foxconn China has had several suicide cases, But I guess around 4 years back, when Foxconn started the operations in India, they started giving out great policies like paid leaves and other great facilities for mothers who are expecting. So even if we're having companies that operate in China, in India, I really don't think that we should emulate them and we can have our own way paved for ourselves. When we talk about the environment, do you actually feel that the government of China did a great job by not actually telling people that there was about the level of PM 2.5 present in their environment? The smog around 5 to 6 years ago, there used to be a lot of smog in the city of Beijing, but the government never agreed to that. When you look at the government apps and check out the level of PM 2.5, it would never say that it is the level was harmful. One of my friends mentioned about the EKC curve, the environmental Kuznets curve. So China successfully, developed themselves as a great nation, as a superpower, and for them the trade-off was the environment. So the curve explains that you can develop a lot and then in the end improve your environment. But guys, I'd like to ask you all a question. Do you actually think the biodiversity that China killed could be replenished? Do you think money can buy life? I really don't think so. And according to me, we should not emulate the Chinese model and we should pave our own way. Thank you.
That was really mind-stimulating debate we had today morning. So big round of applause to at both the batches. It was really nice to hear their point of views for both for and against about the growth and development model of India and China. So it was really good to see you guys debating when we see as teachers you growing from where you were and where you are now. And then I'll ask you to, you are free to leave the stage and go back to your seats.